Here's a game for the Wii that some of you may never have heard of, let alone played it for yourself. It was released late into the Wii's lifecycle and by a very small developer, Gaijin Games, so it may have flown a bit under the radar. The Bit.Trip series has been going since 2009. Every few months they've released a game in the Bit.Trip series for PC. But for the Wii here we have a nifty little collection of all 6 games in the series that had been released up to this point, September of 2011. The Wii versions of these games are updated to take advantage of the motion controller. Most games in the collection are retro style games that you already know and love, but with a rhythm based spin on them. So let's have a look at the games. First off, I'll talk about Bit.Trip Beat and Bit.Trip Flux together, as they're almost identical to each other. So what do you think? Kind of looks like single player Pong, doesn't it? Well, it does play just like Pong, as you have to tilt the controller in order to hit the dots with your paddle. But it's not just a single dot. Dots are constantly flying in from the opposite side of the screen, from all over the place, and you've got to be very aware of what's coming and when. It may seem pretty impossible, but the dots are actually all coming towards you in time with the music, so as long as you're paying attention to the beat, you'll be okay. Although the beat does shift around a lot, so you have to be paying constant attention. It's an endless mode which becomes increasingly harder the further you get. There are also multiple power-ups you can use at certain times which add to the confusion but also add to the fun. Miss enough dots and you'll fall into the Nether Zone. In this zone the music stops and you'll have to rely on the sounds coming out of your Wii remote to keep on beat. The Nether Zone is a sort of last chance mode, hit enough dots and you can recover from it. So even though the game is challenging, it is also lenient, which makes it very addictive. This is definitely my favourite game on the whole collection. Bit.Trip Core is one of the harder games on the compilation. You have to watch every side of the screen to see where the dots are coming from. You then have to use the D-pad and the 2 button in order to shoot them in time. Again, the dots follow an ever-shifting beat, so you have to be constantly on your toes in this game. The dots don't move in a straight line, they can literally go whichever way they feel like it, and if you miss one, you pretty much miss them all. It can really screw with your head, but as long as you find the beat again, you'll be fine. Just expect to fall into the Nether Zone often. This rhythm game tests your hand-eye coordination the most out of all of the games. Bit.Trip Void is one of the easier games and relies less on having good rhythm. In Void, you play as the black dot and your task is to collect more black pixels to gain in size, while also avoiding white pixels. If you press the A button, you will release all of the black pixels you collected and start from square one. The bigger you are when you do this, the more points you gain. You have to be strategic about when you release your pixels, and also a little risky. Void starts off very easy with all the pixels following a set pattern, but the further you get, the more the pixels start to scramble and the harder it becomes to collect them. The pixels do follow a certain beat, but it's not as strict as the previous games in that you don't have to stay exactly on beat in order to progress. For this reason, Void is probably my least favourite on this collection, but to someone who has trouble with rhythm games, it may be their most favourite. Bit.Trip Fate is a really unusual game in that it may be the only game of its kind. It's a 2D shooter game in which you play as the series mascot, Commander Video, and use the Wii remote's pointer in order to aim at enemies. It sounds like nothing special, but what sets Fate apart from other shmups is that you have to stick to a set path. Now, at first this may sound like a terrible idea as it's restricting your freedom, but it's actually a brilliant idea as it adds to the level of strategy required. You have to be constantly aware of where you are, where the enemies are, and where you can access in order to hide from their attacks. Boss fights especially are very challenging because you have to know exactly where you can be on the line in order to avoid the hundreds of bullets. In Fate, the better you do, the more bullets you'll be able to shoot. You can also get power-ups to shoot different types of projectiles. What really sets Fate apart from the other games in the collection is that it's not high score based. There are actually levels in this game that you can progress through at your own pace. When you turn your Wii back on after a session, you'll start back from where you left off. There's also a cool cameo in this game that you may be able to spot. Lastly, we have Bit.Trip Runner, which is probably the main attraction of this collection since, well, it is on the front of the game's case. Runner is pretty much just what it looks like. You have to run, jump, duck and kick in order to avoid obstacles and get to the goal. There's a heavy emphasis on timing. If you're off by a quarter of a second, you will get hit, and you will get sent back to the start. There's no Nether Zone in this game. You get one life to complete a level, and that's it. Like Fate, there are multiple levels in Runner, so it's another game that you can spend a lot of time on, going for more than high scores. As you progress through the game, you unlock more abilities which add a bit more depth to the gameplay and require you to think a little bit more, as you can't just jump over every obstacle that comes your way. The best thing about Runner has to be the visuals. The foreground has the usual 8-bit graphics that the other games have, while the background has beautiful 3D pixel art. It's so bright and colourful. I love that rainbow. There are also bonus levels which look just like Atari games. Now the game has more depth than it may seem at first. Believe it or not, every game has a short story behind them that is explained through some artistic cutscenes. The last thing I want to mention is the music. Of course, being a rhythm game, the music has got to be good, and it certainly is. Don't be surprised if you find yourself bobbing along to the music as you play. What's really nice is that every copy of the game comes with a soundtrack CD. What's great is that even though Bit.Trip Complete is quite an obscure title, you can find it very cheap. If you're a fan of retro visuals or rhythm games, you can't go wrong with Bit.Trip Complete. It's a great addition to your Wii collection,